Hey fam, I just stirred up in my heart to just share a couple of things. I'm going to be real quick. There's three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about obedience, faith, and intelligence. And let me start by this, obedience. 1 Samuel chapter 15, I think is verse 22. There's a conversation going on and they're talking about sacrifice and the process of sacrifice. But there's an idea that, and a principle that comes out of this scripture that says, to obey is better than sacrifice. And I believe where we look at where we are right now, if a lot of more people will obey, they will have to do less sacrificing. What I mean by that, Dr. Edwin Lewis Cole said that you can never compensate through sacrifice what is lost in disobedience. How many of us were told to do certain things? How many of us were asked not to go out? How many of us was asked to do certain things to help slow down the pandemic or the spread of this virus? And we didn't listen. But now we find ourselves either loved ones getting sick, other individuals getting sick, and we're looking at it, and the first thing we say when we look at things that are so large at a global scale, we're going to question, where is God in this? Why would God let this happen? And I believe that that's the wrong question. I said, especially when we look at the root of this, it starts with the lack of the human way of doing things, the lack of the hygiene and a couple of other things. We can root it all the way back to man. So now really to blame God on this, I think that's an unfair conclusion. The other thing is faith, especially for my believers out there. We have to have faith. And when we look at faith, I believe we can look at faith this way. The more information we acquire, the stronger the faith is, the smaller the margins between fear and faith become. So let's look at faith. In Romans, God says, Paul starts writing a letter and says, look, you can see that there's a God, the unseen God, through the seen world. So what happens is Paul starts giving evidence that speaks to the foundation of faith, which is steeped in logic, steep in reason, steep in education and evidence. So therefore, this is not blind faith, but this is faith that is developed on certain evidences that speaks to our way of life. And when you look at that, let's look at the evidence. If we do what we have to do when we have to do it, we can increase our faith by slowing down the pandemic as individuals. You go to a doctor, and the doctor says, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to make it out on top. You're going to make it out of this alive, no problems. And I believe your faith then gets stronger based on the word of the individual saying we're going to make it out alive. Now, if we look at this and we know that God is in control, God has an ultimate plan, in the beginning God, in the end God. And God will never build or creates or leaves on a negative. So no matter what happens, I believe God is in control. Even if we're dealing with death, even if we're dealing with loss, there's something that God has, and there's a bigger picture. And I believe as long as we have faith, built on some evidence and some reasoning, we can be good. We can have less fear. More faith, less fear. And the last thing is intelligence. I have to say something to these churches that are out there not using reason in order to want to stand and say, well, God has called me to still gather. No, because as a leader, as a shepherd or under shepherd of Jesus Christ, you are called to lead people. And you have a lot of nerve to lead people into an environment that can cause them to get sick. And some people are dying from this. This is not a thing that you can just play around with. So please, let's use some intelligence. Let's use obedience. We have faith. Let's use some intelligence. God bless, and I hope you enjoy this word.